We got a lot to do. All right, I'm sorry. I was waiting till quarter till. I don't know what I was thinking. Okay, so obviously I am not Maurice. I think he's out of town. But in any event, you get the younger, less pedigreed, less prepared teacher for the week. You don't have to sit on this side if you want, but in any event. So Maurice gave me a stack of books to read. Had like 70 billable hours this week and kids and all sorts of stuff. So I read like 4 pages, 5 pages. And we're going to cover that on the last slide, I promise. Let's start with, if you were in our journey group, we're going to cover a few slides real quick about something we talked about, and it's going to tie into what Maurice wanted me to talk to you all about. But let's start with does anybody know who this is? Stan Lee. Stan Lee, the god of the Marvel Universe. And Stan Lee is well known for what are called Easter eggs. And Easter eggs, if you're of a certain generation, you think that they're only the things that you hide for your children at Easter, but they're not. Easter eggs are also little tidbits that you hide inside movies or comic books that are supposed to make your most ardent fans sort of chuckle or see the bigger picture, whatever it may be. But Stan Lee is well known for his Easter eggs. And our God is as well. And I think that God's Easter egg is this thing called the golden ratio. So there's this guy, Fibonacci, mathematician, philosopher, centuries ago, millennia ago, and he starts playing with numbers. And what he does is he says, okay, look, if I take the first 2 numbers and add them up, I get 0 and 1, and then I get a 1. Okay, well, let me move down the chain a bit. If I take 1 and 1 and add them together, I get 2. And he just keeps going with this addition of sequential numbers, right? And what he ends up with is, again, you just keep adding them together, and this is called the Fibonacci sequence. It goes on forever because you just continue to add numbers. So then what he does is he says, okay, well, let me take these numbers, sequential numbers, and I'll start dividing them. And what he does is he says that, okay, 8 divided by 5 is 1.6, and if I do the next sequence and so on and so forth, you keep getting closer to this number, right? So taking sequential numbers, closer to this number that is this ever ending number, right? It goes on forever, right? And it's 1.618, whatever, right? This number, is known as the golden ratio. I don't know why that didn't pop up, Ethan, but it didn't. In any event, so it's called the golden ratio, and the Greeks referred to this number as the number phi or phi, right? Okay, so Da Vinci, I don't know what happened, Ethan, but things got moved around. I don't know. I'll work with it, but if it gets to be a problem, we might have to do something. But in any event, Da Vinci looked at this number and he said, hey, it's amazing because the human body is broken down into this number, this golden ratio. And so is, like if you took our hands, or if you take our face, or if you take our bodies, this ratio exists throughout the dimensions of our body. It's amazing, right? So you also can take these squares, a 1 by 1, a 1 by 1, and then a 2 by 2, and it's all, again, the Fibonacci sequence of adding these numbers up, and you continue to make these squares and work them around, and what you end up with is, and it would keep going, I'm run out of room, but you end up with this shape here, right? And if you spiral it, you end up with what's called God's eye, right? Again, this is all based on the number, the golden ratio, okay? And this ratio, again, known as the eye of God or God's eye, is present throughout nature everywhere, right? We see it in our conch shells, okay? We see it in sunflowers. It's in our pine cones. It's in roses. It's in our ear. It's in hurricanes, the universe, right? It's everywhere. And then if you even go out from that specific spiral and just start using the Fibonacci squares, you can find it everywhere in nature. God left us this amazing Easter egg that exists all around us, but again, you got to know to look for it. And then so some people who knew about it started to add it into structures. And they put it into, the Greeks used it. They've got it here in the Taj Mahal. And they even put it in art, right? Da Vinci, again, this was an amazing thing for him to play around with. So anyway, God left us this Easter egg. And all of this is just one little bit of proof that God is this amazing designer, and He has set up this absolutely amazing structure, this not just the creation, but we're going to talk today about a different structure that he created. But this is important to me to set the framework for our understanding that God designed everything, right? And there's purpose behind everything if only we know to look for it, all right? All right, so let's go on to Edmund Burke. I don't know what happened, but in any event, the animations and things are working. It's going to bug me more than it bugs you because you don't know they were in there, but it's bugging me a little bit, sorry. Yeah, well, I'm obviously not an intelligent designer, but in any event, this is a guy named Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke was a philosopher, lived during the time of the Revolution, the American Revolution. He's a British philosopher. And he opined about society. He talked a lot about the structure of society. And he looked around him and he saw the decay in society. And it really troubled him. And I want to read this quote because this is what he said about the family in particular, right? He refers to it in this quote as the little platoon, okay? And what he says is, to be attached to the subdivision, to love, the little platoon we belong to in society is the first principle, the germ, as it were, of public affections. It is the first link in the series by which we proceed towards a love to our country and to mankind. The interest of that portion of social arrangement is a trust in the hands of all those who compose it. And as none but bad men would justify it in abuse, none but traitors would barter it away for their own personal advantage. All right, so for him, the family was the base structure of our society. The family, his little platoon, is the thing where we learn what he says is our affection for country and mankind generally, right? So even going back here, and he was concerned that it was beginning to break down, this idea of the family structure. Okay. I can fill dead air. So anyway, so Edmund Burke, we're going to see here in just a minute, this idea persisted for millennia, and we can see it now. And we'll talk about a philosopher here in just a second. His name is Russell Kirk. And Russell Kirk, the passage that we're going to see is from the 1970s, really quite prophetic with what, at least in my eyes, we're sort of seeing today with the collapse of the family structure. And again, I keep saying structure on purpose because, as we'll see here in just a bit, this structure is something that God made. And it has purpose. And each one of us within that structure has purpose. And when we begin to buck that and sort of destroy what Edmund Burke is saying is the foundation of our very culture, it has some really bad effects upstream into our church, into our local community, into our state and national government writ large. Okay, so Ethan is going to kill me, but whatever. I don't know what happened. It must have been in me sending it to you. So anyway, so the base, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful. It was supposed to start with the family and then go to the church, local community, state, and anyway. And then that box wasn't supposed to be there till the end. So just imagine that it's happening as we talk. So in any event, he says that the family is the base of our society, the base structure, the little platoon. Okay, and we'll talk about Ephesians more here in a bit, so we won't bother reading it. But then on top of that, we have the church. So for him, you have the family. That is the smallest societal unit. And then from there, we grow out, and we have the church. The church is the next biggest societal unit. So does somebody care to read Romans 12, 4 through 5? Obviously, Acts 2, while you're flipping there, we all know Acts 2 well. That is the establishment of the church, the day of Pentecost, right? So, but let's read Romans 12, 4 through 5 when somebody gets that. And since the animation's not working, somebody can turn to Hebrews and somebody Galatians as well.
Just as our bodies have many parts, and each part has its own special function, so it is with Christ's body. We are all many parts of one body, and we all belong to each other.
All right, so the church, again, what Edmund Burke said is this next biggest societal unit. We are one big part of this body, right? We're all pieces, we're all components of this one church body. And then on top of that, we have the local community. So not the state, not the national government, obviously, but our local community. That may be Marysville, or it may be Delaware, or for us it would be Ostrander, but it's certainly the people in our local community that we run into day in and day out. Somebody grab Hebrews 10, 24 to 25.
And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near.
And then somebody Galatians 6, 2.
Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ.
Yeah, so these are just two scriptures that aren't necessarily limited to those in the church, but again, this community, as we see it, that extends beyond the church. And the Bible is threaded with all sorts of verses that tell us to reach out and go beyond this group that meets here and support our local community. And again, for Edmund Burke, that is the next step up in this hierarchy of societal structures. And then we get to the state and national government. And I'll save you reading those because I started 9 minutes late. But what God set up these governments, right? In Deuteronomy, they leave they're in the wilderness, and human nature is, as the third law of thermodynamics would say, like, it runs to the bottom. Like, it says that all things decay. And so humans are, by nature, a group that collectively will decay unless there is a structure in place to keep it together. I mean, it just is. It is like leaving a loaf of bread out on the kitchen counter. It will decay. So God puts in place structure. He gives us government. And I think we as Church of Christers don't like, that maybe government is a God thing, but it truly is. It is a structure that God put in place. He did it then, and he tells us in Romans that everyone in power is somebody that I put in power. They are only there because I willed them to be there, right? And God does some amazing things with government, right? Look at what he did with Joseph in Egypt. He took Joseph, put him second in power, and took what was the most powerful nation at the time and made it the protector of his people. Egypt protected the line that eventually led to Jesus through the Egyptian government, because Joseph was in place to protect them from a famine, right? So in any event, Edmund Burke says that this larger government, this state or national government, is the top, the highest level of societal structure. Now, Edmund Burke, this is where that square was going to pop up, would say that just because the state and national government is so big doesn't mean it's the most important. For Edmund Burke, the most important societal structure is that little platoon. It is the family, right? It is the foundation of everything else. And if you get rid of the family, really, really nasty things happen. And that's where we're going to go next. So this is Russell Kirk. And Russell Kirk, again, this is even longer. I've cut it down. But if you want the website, this article, what he wrote, it is amazing. Again, it's prophetic, but I'll read bits of it. So, once upon a time, the family provided much besides affection and a common domicile. Now, this is 1970s, okay, so 50-something years ago. It was the means for defense against sturdy beggars and masterless men, for education and training of the young, for maintaining the old and infirm, for securing material sustenance. Nowadays, the family has not altogether ceased to fulfill these other functions, but the scope of these activities has been reduced, not always to the advantage of the person and the republic. For the alternative to the vigorous family is the universal orphanage. If the family disintegrates, there remain only two modes of human existence. The first of these is an atomic individualism. Every man and woman isolated and self-seeking suffering. When we cease to cooperate, the average sensual man becomes Cain, with his hand against every man's. In such a condition, there exists freedom of a sort, but it is what John Adams called the freedom of the wolf. For this latter condition, he's now describing that second form of society that can exist absent the family. The latter condition is compulsory collectivism. The state becomes all in all. Only in its most rudimentary and deprived aspect is the family tolerated, if tolerated at all. Children become the wards of the state, reared for the state's purposes. Marriage survives simply to produce the enervating consequences of promiscuity. That condition is described in a number of fictional dystopias of this century. So it's really apt because when Maurice asked me to do this, I've been listening on audiobook to 1984. And that is one that he cites. I mean, and it's amazing to hear them say things like newspeak and to be, word tunneled and talk. Like, it's amazing because 1984 is quite prophetic as well to some of the things we see in our culture. But in any event, I was going to stop here and have us talk a little bit, but we will run out of time if I do that. But I think that this is super important for us to think about. I don't know if we've gotten here, but I do think that our society has taken the familial structure, which is super important, and that we're going to see here in a minute, God put into place, and has stripped it of a lot of its importance and structure. And whether it's on purpose or out of convenience, I don't think that anyone can make a reasonable argument that it's not happening. It is happening. And these two these two things that he describes, this lone wolf mentality, as well as this heavy reliance on the state, both of those things are happening. And it at the same time, in both of those instances, the church loses its importance as that second societal structure. And that is troubling. It is very troubling because people aren't turning to the church, they're turning to themselves and turning to the government, the larger government. And that's not a good thing because the family feeds directly into the church. And if you strip the society of the family, you're cutting out the legs from the church as well. Okay? All right. So, and here's the thing. Let me sidebar real quick. Sidebar. All right. So, I never do animations. In our journey group class, I had something like 300 slides for each class because I didn't use animations for this reason. All right. So, I'm going to have to tell you that it says man, woman, and then, Ethan, if you could, move that up. And it was supposed to pop up at different times. Oh, man, this is, and I never, anyway, this teaches me to try to, I think I'm a millennial, but this is like, anyway, okay, whatever. Somebody grab Genesis 2:7, and then somebody go to Genesis 2:20 and Mark and Genesis and Psalm. When you've got 2:7, go ahead and read it.
The Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living creature.
All right, now I'm going to act like I click. Man pops up. All right, you guys imagine that. Man pops up. So, okay, so the first part of this triangle of the family that God created is man. All right, somebody grab Genesis 2:20-24.
This, at last, is the bone of my bones and the flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken from man.
Woman pops up. All right, imagine it. So that's the second part of our triangle. Now somebody grab Mark 10:6-9. Go ahead.
But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate.
Okay, and now imagine click, and man becomes husband, and woman becomes father. Because what God does in the Bible is he says, you're not just man and woman. I'm creating this structure where you have purpose. You are within my structure, within this family I'm setting up, you are husband, and you are wife. All right, so imagine it. Man disappeared, woman disappeared, now they become husband and wife. All right, somebody grab Genesis 1:27-28.
So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created him. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful
All right, now, first command in the Bible. And husbands, secret, remind your wives, the first command in the Bible is to be fruitful and multiply, right? That is what God tells us at the very beginning. He tells us, be fruitful. So click, children pop up, right? That is the third part of this family triangle. Man, woman, children, husband, father, children. But then God gives us another role as husband and wife. We're also father and mother. Somebody grab Psalm 127:5.
Except the Lord build the house, thy labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, and watchmen walk it, but in vain. It is vain for you to raise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrow. For so he giveth his beloved sleep. Lo, children are an inheritance of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of a youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, and they shall speak with the enemies.
Yeah. So it just reinforces the idea that God, again, encourages us to have children. He says, the man who has many arrows in his quiver is blessed. Right? So this is the triangle that God sets up. This is that little platoon. This is the structure that God created for us. We have this sort of dynamic of three people, right? We have husband, father, we have wife and mother, and then we have children. Okay. Anyway. All right. So in any event, there are not just God doesn't just set up this structure, but then I said He gives us purpose and He gives us things that we're supposed to do and ways we're supposed to behave. And so let's go to Ephesians 5. And somebody grab, you can't see it, the colors weren't supposed to be there. Somebody grab 5:1. 5:1. Again, can't see it in that dark blue. It is a pretty blue, it just wasn't supposed to be there.
Imitate God for everything you do because you are His dear children.
Yeah. So in this chapter, they start to spell out what we're supposed to do as a family. The first thing that we're supposed to do, and this isn't limited to any particular person in the family, is be imitations of God. That is the first instruction here. So somebody go to 5:21 now.
Be subject to one another in the fear of Christ.
Yeah. So next, again, not limited to anyone in this familial triangle, is the idea that we're all supposed to submit to one another. Right? We're supposed to be subject to each other. We're supposed to put the other's needs above our own. Next, go to 5:25 through 29.
Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church.
So then fathers, husbands, love your wife. And then let's go on to Ephesians 22 to 24.
Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, but even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also the wives should submit in everything to their husbands.
Yeah, so again, wife, respect your husband. It's funny, I got a little side note here, but when we were at Church of Christ in Virginia, a young guy stood up to teach a class similar to this, and he said, we're going to get into some scriptures today that are a little bit controversial. I'm like, what are you and he read Ephesians 5, and this is what he's talking about. I went up afterward and I said, what's the controversy? We're just reading Bible here, bud. But it's so this one, I guess it's a little bit of a sticky point sometimes. But that's an instruction straight from God. Wife, respect your husband. And I think it's interesting because Immediately after that, he says, husbands, love your wife. And so I hope wives are supposed to also love their husbands, but that's not in there, but it makes me a little nervous. But in any event, Ephesians 6, 1 through 3.
Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy long life on earth.
Yep. So children, obey your parents, and that doesn't just mean children who are 18 and younger. I think we have a bad way in society of thinking that once we get to be a bit older, we don't need to heed our parents' advice. Certainly, they don't control what time we come home once we have our own place. But God knows, and we should know, that our parents are an absolute wealth of wisdom. Ephesians 6:4 next.
Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Rather, bring them up with the discipline and the instruction that comes from the Lord.
Yeah, so he says fathers, and I think that broadly this would apply to parents as well, but he says fathers, bring your children up in the ways of the Lord. And so this is, he's painting with broad brushes here, but these are really the big picture roles and things that we're supposed to be doing within that familial triangle. It seems really simple, but again, we as humans have a really bad way of complicating things. And so it's, that's really what we're supposed to be doing. And that is the structure and the roles that God spelled out for us. And go back to that Fibonacci sequence, right? We have such a bad way of thinking that God can somehow take a sperm and an egg and put them together, and within the span of 9 months, make billions of proteins change and cell. All these things happen. This amazing creator who can do all this unbelievable thing that we can't as humans ever imagine doing. And yet when it comes to things like this, we don't think that same level of thought and detail went into this. Right? But it did. It did. It's the same designer, the same creator that made all of this happen, made this happen as well. And so, so that triangle really, with 6-4, becomes more of a tetrahedron, right? It becomes this sort of 3D triangle, pyramid sort of shape, where at base we have a husband and father, wife and mother and children, but then on the top is God, because God has always got to be part of that family structure. And those of you who have studied engineering, this is really making you happy right now, because engineers know that the strongest shape is a triangle. That's why when you look at bridges, you'll see a bunch of triangles. Triangles are the strongest shape. Squares are not strong. Triangles are strong, right? And so here, and maybe this is on purpose, maybe not, but you have this amazing, super strong shape, a tetrahedron, that has God at the top, right? So again, I think that familiar structure is a triangle, but we have to keep God at the top and part of that familiar structure, and it really becomes something amazing. So this is what Maurice wanted us to talk about, and we're going to do it in the last 7 minutes. So, but all of it's leading up to this, right? Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9, right? God instructs his people to take his laws, write them everywhere. Write them on your door frames, write them on your sills, write them on your hearts. But he says, impress them on your children. And, I'm sitting up here telling you to do these things, and I'm not that great at doing them all the time either. It's so easy to get caught up in work and everything else and not take those 5 minutes at the dinner table and read a couple chapters, right? Or to talk with your kids, or do whatever it is to keep God the center of that family. And what in this book, what they tell you is that were you to do that better, there would be these 6 blessings here. And a couple of them I think are rather neat, but purpose or meaning, this struck me in particular because it seems like nowadays so many, especially young people, claim to have no purpose, no meaning. And it is really quite sad. Because it comes from a worldview that isn't based in any sort of Christian theology. Because we all know as Christians that every person, regardless of regardless of what they're doing at work, regardless of their grades at school, whatever it is, every person has amazing purpose. And that's because God made each one of us an absolutely unique creation, right? So if you keep your kids focused on God and give them that perspective, they always will have purpose and meaning, because even when they're flipping burgers and making minimum wage, they have purpose at that job, and they have purpose at home. The other thing that it does is, if we stick within this structure, it gives each one of us purpose within the house, within the family, right? Dads, you have a purpose. Spelled it out in Ephesians. Moms, you have a purpose. Children, you have a purpose, right? And so I think that we can look at, in this age, I've never even looked at, I think I've seen TikTok videos and things, but in this age where people are influencers and doing all these, what young ones would think are amazing things, I think it's so easy to forget that we have purpose, and you're important, again, down in that base little platoon, right? And that is what we lose when the focus becomes not God. We lose that sense of purpose within that smaller society. Okay, talks about guidelines for living. Chock full of morals is the Bible, right? And that was a sentence like Yoda might say it. The Bible is full of morals, right? And we talked about this in our journey group as well. The very existence of this set of morals is proof of God, because we have this moral code that God set out for us, that Jesus lived for us, and humans cannot live by that moral code at all. Each one of us fails every day. But yet, if you keep God the center of your family and teach them these morals, these moral rules, this moral code that Romans 8 tells us is actually, it's in our heart. We don't even need God to tell us in the Bible because it's in our heart. But in any event, that will give your kids guidelines for living and being part of what Edmund Burke said is that larger society. Okay, freedom and peace, a positive and confident outlook. Really kind of a cool story in here about a husband and wife. The husband was missing an arm. The wife was blind, totally blind. And they just open up their house and they start fostering children who are disabled. And each one of those kids, it talks about in the book that, they could have had this really poor outlook on life because of their various disabilities, but they brought them in and, showered them in this idea that, again, they're special. Regardless of their physical form, they're absolutely special and they have purpose. And so you can maintain this positive, confident outlook when you're looking in the right direction, right? And if you keep your children and your wife and your husband focused on what is the ultimate purpose, you can maintain that outlook even, if you're fired, whatever you're going through, you can maintain that positive outlook. Support from like-minded people. Holy cow, nowadays is that not important for kiddos? Right? They are absolutely inundated with people who are questioning their faith, their chastity, their morals. And so the idea that they can come home and be surrounded and absolutely adored and loved by people who agree with them is amazing. What an amazing thing you can give the kid just to give them that. And then finally, access to the power of God. Doesn't need much explanation, but teaching them and showing them that there is this amazing being out there who made all this, but also made them. And again, made them important, made them special. So in any event, this is what Maurice wanted to chat about, but I hope that everything we talked about before this helped you to understand that each one of you, when you go home, that little platoon that you've raised or are raising, the work you're doing is so absolutely important, right? To the church and to the local community and to the state and the national government at large, right? But the work you're doing is absolutely amazing, and if nobody else ever says it, it is well appreciated. I mean, God says that these kids, this family that you have is on loan, right? These are God's kids. He's given them to you for a bit, and you got to take care of them, right? So in any event, any questions or comments? We would have about 9 minutes right now, but I started too late.
Joe?
Yeah.
You went back to 1970.
Yeah.
a little bit older. So, I do genealogy as a hobby.
Yeah.
I used to. And I can tell you that if you go back into the 1800s, about 1850, your family structure was on Sundays, the dad held as a preacher, so to speak. He was also the song leader, and it was for his family group inside their own house.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. But how amazing would that be if, if
Look as we come down.
yeah, yeah, yeah. What a cool thing to think about. Yeah.
You had made a comment earlier about you didn't know if it was purposeful or not that the American family was being attacked.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, well, of course it's purposeful. I mean, what better way for Satan to defeat us than pull our legs out from underneath us? We can be so busy with the world, but as anyone who's aging, like myself, understands, when it's all said and done, there's only a few things that are really important.
Yeah.
And family is like the number one that as you age. So of course Satan wants to distract you and break your family down so that when you get to the end of life, you don't have that blessing. You don't have that foundation. And you realize after the fact
Yeah.
how important it really was, and there's nothing left.
Yeah. No, it's.
Of course it's intentional.
Yeah, and you hit on something that I thought about a lot. Is my mom died about 5 years ago. My father-in-law died 7 or 8 years ago. And that's something we've been thinking about a lot. Is we were planning to put this addition on our house is to make room for Dad or my mother-in-law if she needs the space. And going back to the 1850s, I'm sure if you look, you wouldn't see nursing homes and things like that. And so I think, and not everybody is in a position to be able to take care of their parents as they age, but I do think that was sort of the natural intended process. You see it in the Bible.
I'm not even referring to the physical caretaking of your elderly.
Yeah.
The emotional welfare of human beings when they get ready to meet their maker.
Yeah.
And they start examining what they did with their lives and what's important. Family's number one.
Yeah.
It really is about all that matters.
No, that's true. You're true. And it was interesting because in 1984, like I said, I'm listening to it. One of the first things that Big Brother did was he got rid of the family, right? He made the family less important. So in any event, I know we're running out of time, but a couple comments.
At the risk of sounding political, if you look at Marxism, where they want to take the family and kind of do it, everyone think alike and do this, which is a very poor description. But we need to be careful because there are things going on in our society and government that are that.
Yeah.
Even though we don't call it Marxism.
Yeah, and Edmund Burke, the comments were purposely apolitical because I don't think it is. It is a church issue. It's a. I mean, again, the same absolutely amazing being that made you made this, and yet we buck this, right? And so again, we're not all in a position to be able to live this out. Right, we've got to eat, and we've got to make money, we've got to do things, right? It's difficult, it's hard. These seem so simple, but it's not. But I do think there are things that we can do, certainly that I can do each week to better live this out. And I think, going to your point, we as not just a church, but as a community and as a country would be much better if we here took those small steps just to make our families more spiritual, more of a spiritual foundation. I think you had a comment.
We're talking about if you take out the family, you take out the church, and went up one of two things. One is where society harnesses the children.
Yeah.
We've seen a couple of examples of what that leads to in 1935 to early 1940s. That's what the Hitler
Yeah.
was. And
Yeah.
they took over the youth, trained them up to serve the service of the state. We all know what that led to in Cambodia.
Yeah.
In the 1990s, Pol Pot
Yeah.
did the same thing. He took over the children and raised them on his purpose.
Yeah, Pol Pot. Pol Pot isn't somebody we talk about very often, but he was their Hitler. I mean, he was terrible. But again, I don't want to wade into politics too much. But kindergarten comes from, it is the German root word, and the idea there was to teach kids from a young age that it was all the party. So yes, Scott.
As you've led us through this, you've created a very clear vision of a structure that is strong, right?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, why do you just start to doubt our role? And start to deteriorate our role just a tiny bit, and all of a sudden the structure isn't strong anymore. So as much as this is the equation for strength, why did God call out what man's role was, woman's role was? Because he knew those are the points at which Satan will try to get us just to slightly alter the formula to weaken the structure.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say, and then we got to go, I'm sorry. But what you said is so important because I think that society has a really good way of telling those within that structure who is or isn't more important, right? And the thing is that within that triangle, each one of those axes is as important as the next, right? Just as the bolt and the screw, or the bolt and the nut that are up there holding that little piece together right there may not think it's important. If you start to take these pieces out, this structure collapses, right? Just if you have a wife that is questioning her role, or a husband that's questioning her role, that structure falls apart absolutely immediately. So you're exactly right, Scott. So anyway, we're well over. I apologize, guys. I don't know what I was thinking earlier, and good conversation. So.